Gallup has done a study called Global States of Mind 2014. They released it with the Meridian Global Leadership Summit, and it tracks how disaffected people are with their government all throughout the world. Well, that's very interesting. I want to see who came in at the bottom here. They have the bottom 12. They're actually slightly wrong. There's one other country that we need to show you about. I'll get to that in a minute. But first, what are the factors for why people might be dissatisfied with their government? Well, three factors are listed as the main ones, and I think they make sense. Perception of your economic future. If your economic future looks bleak, well, then you have, of course, don't have a great perception of your government. And the gap between potential and reality, that's very important, because a lot of countries have a lot of education but also high unemployment. So it seems like they should have a lot of potential, but the reality is not so good, and that creates a real big problem. And then the third one, I believe, is the most important. Perception of how corrupt your government is. And you'll see in the numbers how well that matches up, okay? First, let me show you one piece of number that they quoted here in 24/7 Wall Street that explained this phenomenon. In 10 of the 12 nations with the lowest governmental approval ratings, more than 80% of those polled believe that government corruption was widespread in 2013. So out of the bottom 12, 10 of them thought that corruption was totally out of control. So let's go quickly to the list from 12 to number 1, okay? And then I'll add the last country. Spain, their government approval rating is 20%, abysmal. They believe government corruption is at 89% believe that it is widespread. Their unemployment rate is 26.1%. If you only saw this country, you'd say, well, look, that unemployment rate is unbelievable. That probably has a lot more to do with it than any other factor. But keep going. Now you go to Portugal next. They also are at 20% approval of their government. 86% say that government corruption is widespread, and their unemployment rate is 16%. Now that's 10% lower than Spain, but still disastrous, right? Now let's go to Jamaica. Again, 20% approval of the government. Corruption is widespread is 86%. Unemployment rate is 15.3%. So those three are in agreement. Bad unemployment, bad corruption leads to great dissatisfaction with the government. All right, now here's where it starts to get a little interesting. Costa Rica is next. They're also at 20% approval for their government, but corruption is at 84%. Unemployment's only at 8.1%. Now that's not great, but it's not disastrous. There's a lot worse in the world. So for Costa Rica, apparently the number one issue doesn't appear to be unemployment. But corruption is always the standard. Number one concern, okay? Again, that's me looking at the numbers here and interpreting it in ways that other people have interpreted as well. You look at the numbers and make your own decision. Romania, it's at 18% approval for government. 77% believe corruption is widespread. Unemployment rate's only 7.3%. But still they're in the top 12 most dissatisfied with their government. Same in Peru. Approval's at 18%. Government corruption, 86% believe is widespread. Unemployment rate is only 7.5%. Pakistan, this is really interesting. 18% approve of their government. Corruption, everybody's worried about it. 81% believe that it's widespread. Unemployment rate is only 6.2% in Pakistan. I wouldn't have guessed that. So that is not a bad rate at all, given the world context. So Pakistan, the unemployment rate is not the biggest issue, clearly. But like most of these other countries, 4 out of 5 people saying this government sucks, it's so corrupt, okay? Moldova is next, 18%, 86% for corruption. Unemployment rate's down to 5.1%. Well, God bless the economy of Moldova. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but you know what? Obviously, the unemployment is not the issue there. Czech Republic, approval is all the way down at 15% for their government. 87% believe government is corrupt. Unemployment rate is only 7%. Greece, unemployment rate again becomes a huge problem. Approval rating of the government is only 14%. 91% believe the corruption is widespread, one of the largest numbers in the world. Unemployment rate is a gigantic 27.3%. Bulgaria, approval is only 13% of government, corruption 79%, unemployment rate 13%, pretty bad. And then Bosnia, Herzegovina, approval of government is at 8%. 91% believe that corruption is widespread, and unemployment rate is a gigantic 27%. Okay, so what's the one country they left out? Well, in all these countries, they ask, do you approve of your government? When it came to the US, the metric that they used was President Obama's approval rating, which is at 42%. Now that's not good, but it's much better than these numbers, right? But wait a minute, that's not whether we approve of our government or not. That number is very partisan. So a lot of Republicans will hate President Obama just because he's from the other party, but a lot of Democrats will support President Obama just because he's from their party. If you ask about our government, Congress, not Republican or Democrat, not an individual candidate, but Congress, in 2013, we were at 9% approval, 86% disapproval, okay? Now, to be fair to us, we have improved vastly. This year, we're at 12% approval, 83% disapproval. So in fact, if you put the US with the proper reading of the numbers into this system, we hate our government second most in the world. Thank God for the Bosnians. If it wasn't for the Bosnians, we'd be number one in approval of our government. We hate our government. Now, here's what's interesting. Unemployment rate's not bad, 5.9%. Believe government corruption is widespread. Now, if you ask the question in that way, you're not going to get 96%. But if you ask the question, do you believe that money has a corrupting influence on our politics, our government? There is a poll on that. It's 96%. So even though our unemployment rate isn't bad, economically, we're actually doing fairly well compared to the rest of the world. Europe is struggling a lot more than we are. And obviously, other parts of the developing world are struggling more. Some are doing better, right? But overall, our economic context is not bad. But we believe that money has corrupted our politics entirely. 96% of the country believes that. So hence, our dissatisfaction with our government is sky high, second worst in the world. That's the reality of the American government. If you don't get money out of politics, people will continue to be dissatisfied because they understand, whether it's conscious or unconscious, they know in their bones that these so-called representatives don't represent us. They represent the people who pay them, their donors. We already have that memo. The next memo is how we fix it. You want to see where that memo is? You go to wolf-pack.com. We have the plan to fix it. We've already begun the plan. We've already had success in that plan. And we're not going to stop until we clean it up. Here's the day I look forward to. Not only do we get the 28th Amendment getting money out of politics, but one day they do a poll many years later, and all of a sudden, after we've solved the corruption problem the best we can, my guess is that the approval rating of Congress is nowhere near 12%, that it is significantly, shockingly higher. You think, oh, no, that's not true. We've always hated our Congress. Not true. Before money poured into the system, with a couple of Supreme Court decisions in the 1970s that changed everything, allowed corporations to give unlimited money to politicians, that's when it began, not as Citizens United. It started in 1976 and 1978. Before then, congressional approval ratings were actually rock solid. They weren't in the 90s or the 80s or anything, but compared to the rest of the world, they were wonderful. Because Congress at that time, before the money came in, actually represented us. And it can again. We are supposed to perfect this union. That's what the Founding Fathers intended. Let's do it. Let's get that amendment passed and rewrite the code. Make sure that we fix this virus in the system. The way to do it is at wolf-pack.com.